We declared war on cancer in 1971, not metaphorically, literally. The United States National Cancer Act was signed into law by Richard Nixon, with the explicit intention of doing to cancer what the space program had done to the moon landing problem. Throw enough money, enough scientists, and enough national will at it until it surrendered. The logic seemed sound. We had just put humans on the moon. Surely a disease was easier than that. It has now been more than 50 years. Cancer still kills an estimated 10 million people a year worldwide. Somewhere in your own body right now, cells are dividing. Billions of them every single day. And every single one of those divisions is a chance for something to go wrong. If your ancestors' cells had failed at this copying process just slightly more often across millions of years, you would not exist at all, because the lineage would have ended in a tumor before it ever reached you. The real answer to why we haven't cured this isn't a lack of funding or a lack of brilliant people. It's something stranger. Cancer isn't really a disease that invades you. We are going to get to what it actually is. But not yet. Here's why this question is heavier than it first sounds. We tend to imagine cancer as an intruder, something foreign that arrives and has to be evicted, like an infection. That framing is comforting because it means somewhere out there is the right key for the right lock. It also happens to be wrong, and that wrongness is the entire reason this war has dragged on for half a century instead of ending in a decade. Understanding why gets uncomfortably personal, because it means the enemy was never outside you to begin with. Let's start with the myth we need to demolish first. Most people assume cancer is one disease with one cause, waiting on one cure, the way polio had one virus and one vaccine. It is not. Cancer is a description of an outcome, not a single mechanism. Breast cancer and pancreatic cancer and childhood leukemia are as biologically different from each other as a cold is from a broken bone, even though we use one word for all of them. Researchers now recognize over 200 distinct types, each with its own genetic fingerprint, its own behavior, its own weaknesses. Looking for the cure for cancer is a bit like looking for the cure for bad weather. There isn't one lock. There are thousands, so what is actually happening? Every time one of your cells divides, it copies roughly 3 billion letters of DNA. Occasionally, the copying machinery makes an error, a mutation. Your body has repair systems for this, and a set of safety genes, sometimes called tumor suppressor genes, whose entire job is to notice damage and either fix it or force the cell to die. Cancer isn't one mutation. It's a cell that has accumulated enough mutations, usually somewhere between 5 and 10, in exactly the wrong combination of genes, to break every single one of those safety systems at once, not decorated with a few errors, built from them, structurally, over years. And here's what almost nobody explains clearly. That broken cell doesn't stay broken in one way. It keeps mutating after it becomes cancerous, generating internal variety inside the same tumor. We'll come back to that, because it's the detail that quietly wrecks most treatments. Now for the numbers, because this is where the scale becomes real. Some estimates put global cumulative cancer research spending, public and private combined, at over $100 billion since the 1970s. And in that same window, the 5-year survival rate for many cancers has genuinely doubled, sometimes tripled. That part of the story is real progress, not failure. But survival rates for the most aggressive cancers, like pancreatic cancer, remain under 12% 5 years after diagnosis. 12%. Read that number again. 12%, despite 50 years and $100 billion. That gap between the survivable cancers and the lethal ones is not random. It tracks almost exactly with how much internal genetic chaos each cancer type generates. Here's the twist, and it's an uncomfortable one. That chaos, that relentless mutating, the thing makes cancer so hard to kill, is the exact same mechanism that makes evolution work at all. Mutation and selection built every eye, every lung, every immune system on this planet, including the one currently reading these words with your eyes. Cancer is evolution running inside you at high speed, with you as the ecosystem. It is not a malfunction of biology. It's biology's most fundamental process, aimed at the wrong target. That is a genuinely strange thing to sit with for a second. So let's close the loop from earlier. A tumor is not one uniform mass of identical bad cells. Because it keeps mutating internally, a single tumor can contain millions of subtly different cellular populations, some resistant to chemotherapy, some resistant to radiation, some resistant to a targeted drug that hasn't even been invented yet. Oncologists call this tumor heterogeneity. Kill 99% of a tumor with a brilliant new drug, and if even a tiny surviving population happens to carry resistance, You haven't cured the cancer. You've just run a selection experiment and bred a stronger one. This is why so many miracle drugs work spectacularly for 8 months and then stop working. It was never really one disease standing still. It was a moving population, adapting in real time, inside a body that has no idea it's a battlefield. There's a parallel worth sitting with here, something researchers noticed decades ago and are still only partly explaining. It's called Peto's paradox, named after epidemiologist Richard Peto. Larger animals have vastly more cells, and cells that live longer, so mathematically they should get dramatically more cancer than small animals like mice. They don't. Whales, with roughly 1,000 times more cells than humans, get cancer at rates that are, if anything, lower. A 2015 study on elephants found they carry around 20 extra copies of a tumor-suppressing gene called TP53 compared to our one. Nobody fully understands why evolution armored some large, long-lived animals against their own cell division and not others, humans included. This is still an open, actively debated question. We cannot ask a whale why it doesn't get cancer, and honestly, that is a genuinely funny sentence to have to type in a serious biology conversation. Here's where it gets uncomfortable in a different way. For decades, medicine assumed cancer had to be fought purely with poison and radiation, brute force tools that damage cancer cells slightly faster than they damage you. It turns out one of the most promising modern approaches, immunotherapy, works by doing something closer to what your immune system was already built to attempt on its own, before we interrupted it with blunt instruments. Cancer cells are extremely good at hiding from immune detection, essentially wearing a disguise. Newer treatments don't attack the tumor directly at all. They rip the disguise off and let your own immune system, the same one your ancestors relied on for hundreds of thousands of years against infection, finish the job it was already trying to do. None of this means older treatments were wrong or wasted. Nobody sensible is arguing we should have skipped straight to modern immunotherapy 50 years ago, because we simply didn't understand the biology well enough yet to build it. So why can't we cure cancer yet? Because it isn't a single enemy. It's your own evolutionary machinery, the same process that built you, turned briefly inward and running without a stop signal. Because a tumor isn't one disease, it's an entire adapting population, generation after generation, all inside one lifetime. Because the cure was never going to be one key for one lock, it was always going to be thousands of narrow, hard-won answers, one cancer type at a time. Your ancestors didn't have chemotherapy, or gene sequencing, or antibodies engineered in a lab. What they had were bodies that mostly won this exact fight, silently, trillions of times every single day, just so you could exist long enough to ask the question.